Live from Toronto, Canada. This is Amir Smiles Immigration Podcast.
Welcome to Amir Smiles Immigration Podcast, and today we're discussing something a lot of you have been asking about. What does Justin Trudeau's resignation actually mean for Canadian immigration? And let's welcome Mr. Amir Smile, who's been keeping a close eye on all things Canadian politics in immigration.
Thanks. And it's a big question.
Absolutely. So before we even get to the resignation, there were already a lot of talks about potential changes to immigration policy.
Right? What were some of the things people were talking about? What were the big issues? I think the biggest one, honestly, was public concern about how fast immigration was happening. Housing costs in the big cities, they were just going through the roof, and wait times for healthcare were getting longer, and some people felt like things like infrastructure just couldn't keep up with all the new people coming in.
Makes sense, yeah.
And all of that kind of put pressure on the government to maybe rethink how they were approaching immigration.
So how did Trudeau's government respond to that, even before he resigned? Well, they definitely started making some changes.
They scaled back the immigration targets, they put in some stricter regulations, and they even put a cap on some programs or just suspended them altogether. Like there was this cap they put on study permits for international students.
Right.
Yeah. A lot of people are not happy about that. And then there's the Student Direct Stream program, the one that speeds up processing for certain work and study permits.
Yeah.
Well, they temporarily suspended that one.
So even before the resignation, there were some big changes happening. But when Trudeau did resign, did that change things dramatically?
Well, not really a sudden, a complete turnaround.
Right.
It definitely showed that the political climate is shifting. Whoever the next leader is, they're going to have to address these concerns that the public has about immigration. It's going to be a top priority.
I see.
So it's like the direction is clear, even if we don't know the exact details of the path yet. Yeah.
But what about changes that were already set in motion before he stepped down? Like a lot of our listeners are pretty anxious about the express entry job offer points going away.
Right?
Is that still happening?
Yeah, that one's already baked into the system. It's going to happen this spring. It's not a legislative change. It's administrative.
Okay, so it's more about how the system works, not about making new laws.
Trudeau resigning and a parliament being prologued won't affect that timeline.
Got it. So that's one less thing to worry about for people using the express entry system.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about some of the people who might become the next leader.
Sure.
Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney are two names that keep popping up. How might their approaches to immigration be different, especially with all this public pressure we've been talking about?
Well, Freeland, I think she'd probably still prioritize economic immigration, but she'd do it in a way that tries to address those public concerns. Like maybe she'd propose more funding for organizations that help newcomers settle in and adapt to life in Canada. And maybe she'd push for policies that encourage building more affordable housing, especially in cities where it's really expensive. The main goal would be to make the whole integration process smoother and ease people's anxieties about the population growing so quickly.
So finding that balance right between what the economy needs and what people are worried about. Now, what about Carney? Would his approach be different?
I think Carney might be more data-driven, really focus on matching immigration to specific needs in the labor market. Like a very targeted approach, he might prioritize bringing in skilled workers for areas where there's a real shortage of people like healthcare or tech. He'd also probably be big on planning for the long term to make sure that infrastructure and social services aren't overwhelmed. It's about being proactive and trying to get ahead of problems before they even become problems. So both Freeland and Carney seem aware that immigration needs to be approached in a way that's sustainable. The balance is helping the economy grow with taking care of the people who already live here.
But there's another big factor we haven't talked about yet, and that's the U.S.
Right?
How might the new Trump administration affect Canadian immigration policy?
Well, that's the big unknown, right? We've already seen some signs that the U.S. might try to pressure Canada. There's been talk about tariffs if Canada doesn't tighten up its border security. And we all know what Trump's stance on immigration is.
Yeah,
He's not shy about using economic leverage to get other countries to do what he wants. The new Canadian leader, whoever that ends up being, is going to have to walk a tightrope trying to balance what Canadians want with what the US wants.
So the future of Canadian immigration, it's really at a crossroads right now with lots of different possibilities.
It really is. And all of this, it's not happening in isolation.
Right?
There are all these global trends, geopolitical shifts, things like that.
Yeah,
They could have a huge impact on Canadian immigration.
you're right.
We can't just ignore the bigger picture.
So what are some of those global trends that might play a role here?
Well, one big one is just the competition for talent around the world. Countries are realizing how important it is to attract skilled workers and entrepreneurs. It helps their economies.
Right?
It helps their societies. Canada is not the only place people want to go anymore. So Canada might have to work harder to stand out.
Exactly.
They might need to make the application process easier, offer more incentives, really highlight what makes Canada special, like the social safety net or the commitment to diversity and inclusion. It's almost like Canada needs to create a better brand for itself when it comes to immigration, like it's competing in a global marketplace.
Exactly. But what about security concerns? How do those fit into all of this?
Security is always going to be a top priority for any country, and Canada is no different. We've already seen a bigger focus on border security and stopping irregular migration. That's probably going to continue, especially with the US pushing Canada to do more. So the new leader is going to have to balance attracting people with keeping the country safe.
It's complicated.
It is.
But let's bring it back to the individual, someone who's actually thinking about coming to Canada. What advice would you give them with all these potential changes on the horizon?
I'd say stay informed. Things can change so fast when it comes to immigration policies. Don't rely on old info or rumors. Go to the official government websites, talk to good immigration experts. It's about getting the right guidance from people who know what they're talking about. I think it's important to remember, though, that even with all this uncertainty, Canada is still a pretty great place for immigrants. The country hasn't changed its values. Diversity, inclusion, opportunity, all those things are still important here.
Couldn't agree more.
Canada has always been a country built on immigration. That's not changing anytime soon. The specific rules might change, but the fundamental idea of welcoming newcomers, that's still very much alive.
Right? And everyone's situation is different too, right?
Yeah. What works for one person might not work for another. That's why getting personalized advice is so important.
Okay, let's switch gears for a minute and talk about Trudeau's overall legacy when it comes to immigration. Seems like kind of a mixed bag, doesn't it? It is complicated.
Yeah, when he first came into office, he was all about being pro-immigration. Those pictures of him greeting the Syrian refugees at the airport went viral.
Yeah.
It really showed Canada as this compassionate and welcoming nation. It was a powerful statement for sure. And he did set some really ambitious targets, bringing in a ton of newcomers every year.
He did.
But then, as we were talking about earlier, all that rapid immigration started to cause some pushback, and the government had to make changes. They scaled things back, added more regulations. Some people felt like Trudeau wasn't keeping his promises, so he was this champion of immigration at first, but then he had to deal with the reality of actually being in charge and responding to what people were saying. His legacy is about big goals and then having to adjust those goals.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
But regardless of how you feel about Trudeau, the truth is Canada is kind of at a crossroads now when it comes to immigration.
Exactly.
The next leader, whoever it is going to have to make some really tough decisions about how to balance the economy, social cohesion, and security all at the same time. And it's all happening in a world that's changing incredibly fast. That's the deal with the US, with this global race for talent, and with public opinion that's constantly evolving. It's a big challenge, but it's also an opportunity to really shape the future of Canada and its place in the world when it comes to immigration.
Yeah, well said. This has been a really insightful discussion. We have covered a lot information, from the immediate impact of Trudeau stepping down to the broader trends that are shaping Canadian immigration and what the future might hold.
I hope it's helped people understand just how complex and nuanced this whole issue is.
I think it definitely has.
We're going to leave you with one final thought, something to really think about, a question to ponder. Imagine you are the new leader of Canada. What would be your top priority when it comes to immigration? Would it be attracting skilled workers to help the economy grow? Would it be making sure that newcomers integrate well and that society stays cohesive?
It's a great question.
Or would it be about tightening border security and aligning more closely with US policy? It's something to really think about as we move into this new era of Canadian immigration.
It really is a question that everyone in Canada needs to consider. Absolutely.
And for anyone listening who's thinking about immigrating to Canada, remember, stay informed, do your research, and get good advice from people you trust.
Exactly.
Talk to reputable sources and don't hesitate to reach out to licensed professionals. It's not just about the immigrants themselves, it's about Canadian society as a whole. It's easy to get caught up in what's happening right now, but we really need to think about the long term.
I agree.
We have to move past those simplistic, black and white arguments and really have a thoughtful discussion about what we want Canada's immigration system to look like, a system that benefits everyone, both newcomers and people who've been here for generations. System that reflects Canada's values, but also one that can adapt to a world that's changing all the time.
It's a tough challenge.
It is, but I think Canadians are up to it. Canada has a history of finding solutions to complex problems, solutions that are practical but also compassionate.
Right.
And I think that spirit of, innovation and working together, that's what's going to guide us as we figure out this new era of immigration.
Well said.
Yeah.
This has been a really eye-opening discussion. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us and helping us understand this complex landscape.
My pleasure. I always enjoy having conversations that really matter, and I hope our listeners have found this one both
informative and, something that makes them think.
I'm sure they have.
And for anyone listening who's thinking about making Canada their new home, remember to stay informed. Do your research and talk to experts you trust.
Absolutely. Make sure you understand all the options available to you. And to learn more about immigrating to Canada, follow us and complete our free assessment form on our website.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And we look forward to joining you in our next immigration podcast. Bye for now.